Hello, welcome to the second part of this History Vision video, which is looking at the start of the Cold War. And in particular here we're going to look at specific events and developments, including the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan and Common Form, and the Berlin Airlift and Blockade. As I talked about in the last video, this really is a clash between two men. Harry Truman, Joseph Stalin. Guys that only ever met once. They met at the Potsdam Conference, hated each other, never met again, and yet their actions and their ideologies really do set the tone for the Cold War. What we've also got at the end of the Second World War, for the first time in history really, are two major superpowers. The USA and the USSR come out of the Second World War as bigger, stronger and wealthier than all other countries. Britain, Germany, France are not in the same league anymore. Britain and France destroyed financially by war, Germany obviously beaten and divided. What also changes is American attitudes. Americans now believe that they have a responsibility as a superpower. It's part of what they believe in now, and what they do is that they have a responsibility to the rest of the world. In the 1930s, when Hitler was rising to power in Germany and the Nazis were moving towards dictatorship, America did nothing. America didn't object, America didn't intervene. At that point, they were following an isolationist foreign policy. And there is a sense that almost they feel slightly guilty about that. There is a very strong feeling in America that they should have done something. Had they acted in 1934 or 1935 against Hitler, they might have avoided the Second World War. They might have avoided the Holocaust. And they do believe that they're not going to make the same mistake again. They do look at Stalin as if he's another Hitler. They do look at communism as if it's the same as Nazism. One of the key developments is the Truman Doctrine, which was introduced in 1946, which is a new policy by the American government towards communist expansion. It means very simply that the Americans are prepared to stop the spread of communism. Truman said that communism flourishes in countries where there's poverty. He's dead right, absolutely right about that. It accepts in the Truman Doctrine that once a country's become communist, it has been lost. They can't do anything more about it. It's gone. But they can work on those that aren't communist yet. And what the Truman Doctrine is an open, firm promise to any country in the world. It's Truman saying, if you're a democracy, if you fear the spread of communism, if you think the communists are trying to take over your country, we will help you. The Americans will send you money, aid, advice, whatever is necessary to stop you becoming communism and communists. So it's quite a major statement, and by making that statement publicly as president, Truman is making sure that future presidents have to follow that same plan. It then has to be backed up with something, and it's backed up by Marshall aid. Truman sent the American general George Marshall to Europe in 1947 to assess the state of Europe, and Marshall came back with horrible news. He said that across Europe, almost every country's economy is in ruins. Europe owed America $11.5 billion, which they borrowed during the Second World War. And Marshall said they can't pay it back. There's absolutely no way we're getting that money back. Don't ask for it. They can't give it. He also recommended giving them more. He said they needed another $17 billion. Which needs to be made available to any European country to rebuild. So if we do it, we give them the money, they will rebuild, they'll build new houses, they'll create jobs, people will have stuff that they don't want to lose. That stops communism. Truman put the plan to Congress in December 1947 and they turned it down. American government, American Congress said, there's no way American taxpayers are going to pay for the rest of the world. No, we're not going to do it. In March 1948, the Communist Party took over the government of Czechoslovakia. That was seen as a failure by America. Czechoslovakia had been one of those countries that would certainly have appealed for martial aid and got it. Martial aid wasn't available, they didn't get it, and now they're communist. And there was a sense in America, that one just got away. In March 1948, the American Congress met again and passed martial aid. They made $17 billion available. Britain was first in line to apply for it. There were houses built just across the water in Plymouth because of martial aid money. Stalin banned all communist countries from applying for it. Common form is also important. It's one of the things that often people miss out on and forget. Common form stands for the Communist Information Bureau, and I suppose in some ways you can see it as the alternative to martial aid. The Communist Information Bureau, Common Form, coordinated the work of all communist parties in Eastern Europe. It was a way in which Stalin could bring the leaders of communist parties in Bulgaria and Hungary and Czechoslovakia to Moscow, talk to them, develop their ideas, make sure they were all working in a coordinated way. It was also a way to check up on them. If he thought they were about to apply for something like martial aid, Common Form gave him a way of finding that out and getting rid of them. The first real flashpoint of the Cold War comes in Berlin. In 1946, Britain, France and America had combined their zones in Berlin to form one zone. Berlin became known as Bizonia. That's two zones. The Allied one and the Russian one. In the Allied zone, they introduced a new currency, which was desperately needed. I mean, the German currency was worthless. Stalin saw this as an attempt by the Allies to take over Berlin. If there's a new currency in part of Berlin, what happens in the other part? The other half is going to have to accept that currency as well. And that's a way of moving the Soviet part of Berlin towards the Allied part. Stalin retaliated. In June 1948, he blocked off all access routes into Berlin. He blocked off the supply lines on the roads, railways and canals. He believed this would force the Allies out of Berlin. It's meant to be deliberately provocative. American tanks could have crossed those roadblocks easily. If they had, it would have been a declaration of war, and the Americans would have started it. It's also a challenge to Truman. How serious is he about containment? Containment's another word for the Truman Doctrine. It's about containing communism in one area. The only route that Stalin had to keep open to Berlin was the air. He could have shot down planes flying over Soviet airspace, but that would have made him look like the villain. It would have made him look like the bad guy, particularly if those planes were obviously not carrying weapons. The Allies took that route. They began the Berlin airlift. They airlifted supplies in. They flew it into Germany. Flying over Soviet Germany, flying into Berlin, dropping off at Berlin airport, unloading, flying off, coming back again. For 10 months, West Berlin was supplied. An endless stream of planes bringing in everything. Food, clothing, oil, coal, the lot. The planes were painted white deliberately to show that they were unarmed. Even though a lot of these planes are converted bombers. And there's a certain irony, I suppose, that these are bombers that 3 years earlier were flying over Berlin and dropping bombs and blowing up Berlin. Now they're dropping off food parcels and milk and babies' nappies. Again, painting those planes white is a deliberate provocation. It's almost like, go on Stalin, shoot down that plane. Dare you? Because if you do, you started the war. This cost the Americans an absolute fortune. Billions of dollars spent. But they were prepared to keep putting that money in. They thought that this was an investment worth taking. And by May 1949, it was clear that the Allies were going to keep up with the airlift, and Stalin called it off. It was a defeat, I suppose, for Stalin. It cost the Americans a huge amount of money, but it did show that they were prepared to take extreme action to keep Berlin. As a result of the Berlin airlift, in April 1949, Britain, France, Italy, Finland, Portugal, Canada and the USA set up NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation. It's an agreement to work together. It's an agreement that the armies of those countries would coordinate with each other. It is a preparation for war. The other immediate consequence of the Berlin blockade was the permanent division of Germany. In May 1949, the British, French and American zones were united and became known as the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany. In October 1949, the Soviet zone became the German Democratic Republic, East Germany. And until 1991, those two countries would remain separate and apart. You'll always get a question on the beginnings of the Cold War in the exam. It might be the compulsory question. It might be that first question in the exam which has a cartoon and then has a B part question with it, which is worth 9 marks. It's a big B question where it will say explain why something happened. If it's not the compulsory question, it will either be question 2 or question 3. It'll be a straightforward ABC question. They tend to put all of the Cold War beginnings in one question, Cuban Missile Crisis in another, Vietnam in the third. Vietnam and the Cuban Missile Crisis will be the subject of the next 2 revision videos. Thank you very much. Enjoy your revision. And thank you very much. Thank you.